Okay, hello everybody and welcome back. This is part 2 of the Justice, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion in Science Communication session. And from now on, I will just call it JEDI or EDI for short. The first session, we had an introduction to many different terms and ideas and potential solutions. And please do remember that these sessions are an introduction to potential avenues that we could follow within this work. The work doesn't stop today, it's something ongoing. Many of the exercises are only starters. They're things that you would in reality spend half an hour, or a little bit of time once a week, once a month, whenever you have the opportunity after an event. So although these times might be short, the best use we have now is each other. So make use of each other, do ask questions, learn from each other, so that when you go to approach these exercises in your own time, you've got other people's voices to respond to. We also have a WhatsApp group, and there will also be a Facebook group. It's already around, it's already set up, but I've just got to send out invites to everybody, which I'll be doing in the following week. So please do keep in contact with each other and ask questions and revisit the ideas in the coming weeks, months, and years. Okay, so what did we do in the last session? In the last session, for a recap, we found out that there are many different ways and reasons to focus on JEDI in SciComm. Sharing in scientific advancement and its benefits is a human right. That's one key example. What we're doing is we are actually helping people to have their human rights met. Equality and equity are not the same thing. Equality focuses on similarity, whereas equity focuses on difference. So equity is the preferred process for achieving an outcome of equality for all, not just for some. Diversity is also very, very complicated. There are many forms of diversity which intersect in unique ways. Some groups remain marginalized or underserved by science communication. And hopefully we can help to change the tides in that somewhat and try to balance it out somewhat. It's not easy, and I'm going to tell you now that this session is meant to challenge you, and it will challenge you in different ways depending on how much experience you have, and it will be about taking on challenging thoughts and finding ways to solve problems that we may not have thought about before. And so hopefully you'll be taken into a slight position of being uncomfortable, of finding difficulty. Do talk to each other. I am aware that we all have different levels of speaking English, and we will all be communicating to each other in that language. So please do be aware of each other's abilities to speak English. If you're better at speaking English, do give time and space for people who are not as good. And also, if you feel uncomfortable speaking as much in English, feel free to take your time and write your responses in the chat. In that way, everyone can be heard and share their thoughts, regardless of how much or how little we feel we can actually communicate or offer. Okay, so let's get into this. What is the goal of this part of the session? Well, it's to increase the use of equitable, diverse, and inclusive practices within science communication to promote justice and increase diverse public's access to science in its broadest sense. By the end of the session, you will explore what is meant by inclusion and justice, discuss common issues related to JEDI in science communication, consider how diversity can be used to increase inclusion in science communication, and explore how science communication can be used to promote justice. So let's start with seeking inclusion. So we're going to introduce our characters from before. These are characters that could represent any group, any characteristics in society. Now, it's good to recognize that globally, people have different levels of access to science. It's not equal. We're not on an equal footing as yet. Now, some have comparatively no access at all. So their access to science is pretty much non-existent. And although science is going on all around them, because of different contexts they're in, they just can't access it really pretty much at all. And it doesn't seem to be around them. For others, it seems available, but it's just out of reach for all practical purposes. And remember, we are using the apple tree to represent the idea of knowledge and scientific knowledge and the access to the benefits of science, access to the benefits of this tree growing, hence the apples. Now you can see that here the tree is on top of a mountain. So although it exists, nobody is going to trek all the way up the mountain unless they're really serious about gaining that knowledge and they feel they have the means to actually climb that mountain. For most people, having it on top of a mountain is pretty much the same as not having access to it at all. So for both of those situations, a situation of having no access or limited access, or having access that is so far out of reach that it's pretty much not easy and not a realistic option to go and seek it, these are both forms of exclusion. The people are being excluded from the science, even though it's there, it's far out of reach. So are you yourself providing science or scientific knowledge, but actually it's so far out of reach of some communities that you are inherently excluding them, but not realizing you're doing it. And this is the types of thoughts we're going to challenge. But if we have exclusion, most of the time, it's not that previous scenario. Most of the time that we commonly find is that it is within reach, but there is some kind of barrier to people actually engaging with it. And so we have to assess these situations and think about what we're dealing with and maybe consider the barriers to engagement. But let's think about that a bit closer. We can see exclusion has having barriers to people engaging with science and scientific knowledge. So that must mean that if you remove the barriers, you'll have inclusion, right? Well, not exactly. That's not really that simple. Emily Dawson, she's a researcher from the UK who does a lot of work on equity, diversity and inclusion and social justice and science communication. She points out that a barriers approach does little to explain the complexity involved in social exclusion from science communication, not least how multiple barriers might intersect. And by focusing on a focus on barriers, questions of power, dominance, and domination recede into the background. She's basically saying that if we just think about the existence of barriers and that we must remove them, sometimes we miss some of the other really present problems that are causing these barriers to exist in the first place. So we're not just trying to remove the barriers, we're trying to remove the cause of the actual barriers being in place in the first place. And a classic example she put was that in museums in the UK, one barrier was perceived that they were too expensive for people to go to. But yet still, when they removed the price, the fee for entering those museums, it didn't increase the range of people who went there. It was just more of people with the same characteristic, more of the middle class members of the communities who had the free time, had the expendable means to get there, and they could take their children there. They weren't busy trying to work to earn money. They didn't have other particular problems that got in the way. So sometimes just by thinking, let's remove a barrier, we're not really thinking about what are the actual reasons that people may not be able to engage with them situations, let alone want to engage with those situations. So it is far more complex than just removing a barrier or a few barriers. So what is inclusion then? Well, the group DiverSci, which is a wonderful group who's produced many, many resources. They've brought together, I should say, not just produced, but they've produced the website and some lovely resources, but they have also brought together lots and lots of resources that you can find in one place to learn more about science communication. I'll just see if I have a link here. I think that would be handy to put a link in the chat for you. So please do check out DiverseEye. They're a wonderful group. They are mainly based in Europe, but they have people representing from all over the world. And just go to their page, check out their resources. And if you want to know more about diversity and inclusion in science communication, there would be a real good place to start. So, oh, fantastic, Sarah. Woo, thank you. Oh, I love you guys. You guys are really on it. Thank you, Sarah. That's really handy. So Sarah has just put the link in the chat that I was busy trying to find. So thank you, Sarah. That's really handy. Okay, so DiverseEye say that inclusion is based on change and acceptance and is an equitable and participatory approach that creates the condition of accessibility that fits everyone's needs, requirements and preferences, so all can belong. Inclusion is not forced on people, and participation is a choice, where every individual or group is welcomed, respected, supported, and valued. And so the focus is on reaching every individual or group and giving them access through equitable practices and providing inclusion for all. Now, just to remind us of what equity means, here's another one of the well-known diagrams that are around. And equality treats everybody the same, regardless of their individual differences. So in this situation, regardless of their height, they're given the same box. Whereas equality acknowledges and responds to difference by treating people proportionately to their needs. It recognizes people's difference and it sees what they need and it hopes to provide them with that. So how can we achieve inclusion? Well, I think that to provide inclusion and to be more inclusive, we have to be diverse. And on the individual level, remember, we can try to alter, change, or adapt our own ways of behaving and our own characteristics to help include those characteristics of others, to try and increase the overlap between ourselves and them. So the first thing we want to think of is, who are the audiences we're working with? This is where everything starts from. We want to know, who are the people that we are trying to be inclusive of? Now, we made a audience profile in the previous session. And so we've pretty much made a start at looking at these groups and organizations, groups and communities. And so this picture just represents, we might think that we want to deal with children more, or in the middle, it might be we want to deal more with local or indigenous communities. And in the bottom is that we might want to deal and work with families. So these just represent one or many of the groups that we could hope to focus on. And our main goal here is not to think about the people that we do have in the room, although all of these practices are really important to being more inclusive of those people as well. So it is worth looking at who's in the room and thinking of how to be more inclusive to different pockets of the people in the room. But I want us to focus on who is not in the room. To me, this is the real challenge, forcing ourselves to think beyond the everyday and the usual. So how do we do that? So first of all, you have to pick your group that you want to work with. You've got to work out who it is you're trying to reach. Once you have that fixed in your mind, then you can think of the best ways to reach them. Now, if you remember from the last session, we had some tips on how to reach underserved communities. For example, start by listening. Go through measures to reduce the distance from them. And if you want to remind yourself of that, you can go back to it in your own time and really look through that paper and look at the different things they recommend and how to do it. And then you can come back and reassess this activity. And those are things that we won't be able to fit into this workshop now, I'm afraid, but just keep these things in the back of your mind and we'll work together to try and come up with solutions. So once you're sure about your audience, next up, think about what you can change to reach them more effectively. So one thing you can think about is producers. You can think about who produces the knowledge, who are the people, and what types of knowledge are you going to put people in contact with. So you might think of the natural sciences, the applied sciences, the formal sciences, the classic sciences that people aim to communicate. But we should also extend our idea to the social sciences. Which social sciences are most relevant to people? When introducing the general idea of science, would it be more useful to introduce ideas from the social sciences, for example, the psychology of exercise, or how people think together? Am I speaking too clearly? Just to check. Hadiza, just to think. Okay, so it may be that I can speak slower and more clearly, if that would make a difference. So, and please do let me know. Oh, that's fine, yeah. So I'm trying to speak slower, but I sometimes speak really fast. Oh, thank you. Okay. So producers, are they natural sciences? Should we look to the social sciences? Also remember that our audiences aren't just publics, it's also scientists. So we should consider using information and evidence from social science to communicate to scientists and researchers what types of methods they could use to reach their audiences more effectively. So we're not just communicating one type of science, there's so many different types. And also, are we just communicating raw scientific knowledge or knowledge obtained through the scientific method? Or are we considering local knowledge? Are we incorporating indigenous ways of knowing into our conversations and dialogue? Because these are important places that people start from, and it depends on the community. But as science communicators, we shouldn't hope to just communicate our science and our way of thinking. We need to incorporate and complement different ways of thinking and knowing, and look and be critical of how they work best for communities. So we're not just talking about theoretical things that are far removed from communities, but we're talking about things that are relevant to them, to be more inclusive of them. So what do they want to know? Who do they want to see? Also, what do they look like? Do they all look like one type of characteristic or have one characteristic? Or can you find producers of knowledge that overlap with the characteristics of the audiences you want to speak to? And sometimes it's recognizing that you are not the best person to communicate with the communities. You can have the best thoughts and the best regards, but sometimes you need to try and collaborate, cooperate, or even consult with people from different communities and ask and see if they're willing to work with you to work with these different communities you might want to target. Okay, so we also have practitioners. How can we be diverse with practitioners? Again, what do they look like? Are the practitioners from those local regions, from those communities? If so, they'll have a natural ability to know the needs and wants of their communities because they're from that community. So it's less work for them to try and bridge that gap. Also, they'll look or sound more familiar. They'll know the terms that people use. It's just so much easier. So who are the practitioners? Who are the science communicators? What do they look like? What are their characteristics? Also, consider, are you in a place where there's mostly journalists? Are there much freelancers? Are there much museums? Are there much explainers? What types of science communicators do you have? Do you have many people who blog, who make YouTube videos? Some regions have more than others, but how can we adapt and be diverse with the ways we actually deliver our science, the ways we package the information, the goals we choose when we're trying to reach audiences? How can we diversify them to try and be more inclusive of these audiences? Do we go out into the street? Do we do science communication up close and personal or from the front of a stage? These are things we should consider when trying to increase access to different audiences. You also need to think about places. And remember that I've given these different areas, but they could be more than these. These aren't the only things you should consider. What's important is that you're constantly considering and reflecting, thinking about how you are doing what you do and how you can adjust yourselves, your organizations, and your practices to better meet the needs of underserved communities and peoples. So thinking about places, do you work in a museum? Is the museum accessible to people? Can that group be better met or served in a science center? Do you have to collaborate? Are you the wrong people to actually communicate with them? So you would reach out and think, I'd really like to meet this community, but bringing them to the museum isn't really gonna cut it because our museum has a colonial past, which we're trying to address, but we're speaking to people who really do not feel that the museum is for them. And other things like, can they make it to the museum? Is there a way that we can take the museum to them or take the experience or the ideas to them? Is the group I'm working with, do they prefer social media? Will they never ever go to a museum unless it's a school trip? But do they always use social media? Can we reach them in that way? Do you work in a museum and also have a social media account and you've realized that not everyone comes to the museum, but we can bring the museum to them through social media? Is it that people do not actually like to go to places or that there are no places in their region? Is it that they tend to meet just outdoors underneath a tree in a social gathering where that's where they share knowledge? We have to be prepared to meet people on their terms. One of the other recommendations of reaching underserved audiences, go to where they are, get to know them, get to meet them, get to understand them. Okay. So before we go there, now I have a job for all of you. And we're going to go into breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, we're going to do an activity. I do have a Padlet for that activity that I'm going to share with you now. So the job here, what just happened? There we go. The job here is to look at how you can diversify your practices to be more inclusive of audiences who are not typically in the room. So I'm going to put a link to a Padlet right here. Okay, there we go. So in a minute, I'm going to split you up into different rooms. And please feel free, even if you can't speak through the microphone or you have a low connection, please feel free to actually comment, make comments and share with them, or even put ideas directly onto the Padlet with your team, with your group. So I will share on my screen now, actually. This is an exercise you have in your workbooks, but as each workshop goes past, I slightly adapt things to make it more clear. So as you can see, there will be the different areas. Each group, you'll choose one audience that you don't find it easy to reach. So maybe when you have a quick discussion at the start, spend 2 minutes just saying who your hard to reach audiences are. You may find there's an overlap. So first, choose a specific audience. And don't worry, you can go through and do it for different audiences. But first, choose your audience, then think, how can we think about different producers of knowledge? How can we assess the production of knowledge? And you think about how diverse the scientist characteristics are. How can you match different producers to different audiences, different types of knowledge? Are those audiences interested in new frontier discoveries, or do they just need to go through the basic knowledge that has been put down in textbooks? And just given the very basics to bring them up to speed. Are you going to include local knowledge or indigenous ways of knowing? How can you adjust the types of things you're communicating about? Practitioners, again, think about some of those questions and think about the places. And so choose an audience and think about how you can reach them better and increase access by adapting each of these. There is an example in the Padlet when you look at it. And so please just follow that. Just write producers, the things you think you can do, practitioners. So have a go. I will join your rooms to see if you're doing all right. And this is the basic challenge. Choose an audience and think of how you can provide diversity of these regions to be more inclusive. So hopefully everybody is back in this main room now and ready to just share a bit about what they've done. So I'm just going to share the main screen here now. There we go. Fantastic. So hopefully now you can all see the screen. And I'd really be interested. So would anybody from any of the rooms like to share their thoughts or anything that they've added to the Padlet? So I look for volunteers first, because that's always useful if someone's like, yay, I want to talk about it. I know some of you said you were talkative earlier in the 3 words to describe yourself. So now's your chance. So would anybody like to share the thoughts of their group? And please do consider within your groups that some of you may not speak English as a first language or as well. So please do be prepared to be that advocate for your group, because you have it's easier for you to use the English language, because these are things that we have to be aware of as in this work, is that sometimes people would like to share, but they don't feel as comfortable. Yes, Sarah, please do. Feel free to introduce your group and some of the stuff you spoke about.
Okay, hello. Sorry, I don't have my camera camera attached, but I'm here. So we kind of got cut off actually at the end. So I hope my group doesn't mind that I put my hand up. So we didn't talk about who might talk about the group. So we were group 6. Okay. And interestingly, the first thing we found out was that we were an all-African group. Yes. Oh, wow. So Ghana, South Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria. I think that's right. Okay. So we sort of had a few questions at first. So was the idea we were supposed to think of one particular audience, and was it ideally someone that we don't normally deal with? Absolutely. Just to challenge you. Okay. So yeah, then I think we did agree. Yes, the rural community, most of us don't really deal with those, and we chose then specifically farmers. And then when we thought about, well, then how would you reach them? I mean, actually, none of us knew much about farming, but we thought, well, there's probably some kind of maybe an agricultural forum, or maybe a supply place where they might get their supplies from, or maybe a community centre. So basically, we would go to them, go to their community. And it actually was only later I saw what someone else had written. I thought actually radio was also another good one, because we know that in the rural areas, often radio is more important to some of the communities. But anyway, we had like a local community type centre. And then the practitioner, you know, it needs to be someone they trust and can identify with, ideally from that community, but and also someone who speaks their language. I mean, their literal language. I was just giving the example that in Ghana, although English is the official language, you know, quite a number of people, you know, don't have the opportunity to learn it that much at school. So, and especially in the rural areas, really, you know, quite a lot of people don't speak it too well. So you would really want somebody with the local language. Producer, we had a bit of a discussion about what the producer actually was. And so is it like the where they're getting the knowledge from? I think I looked back in one of the fantastic. The people who are producing the main types of knowledge that are shared within those groups and communities, and the people that they regard as worthy of producing knowledge. So would they listen to a medical doctor or a traditional healer? And who they trust for knowledge would be important to who you present in front of them, or the type of knowledge that you try to complement with scientific knowledge. Okay, so we kind of had a combination, because we said, first of all, we said then people from, you know, maybe some agricultural research institution, but then we thought also that should be their own local knowledge should be taken into account, because especially farmers, I'm sure they'll have, you know, all the generations of knowledge of the different practices. So somehow combining those two, I suppose, I mean, ideally, you know, maybe the research people, they might have some new knowledge to help the farmers and complement what they're doing already, something like that. So I think if there's any group members that think I've missed anything out, please do say so.
No, see, that is fantastic. And it's exactly the type of thing we're trying to think about, because often we cannot see the other approaches that could be taken because we're busy taking the approach we take. We're in a certain organization. We do not have access to other people thinking in different ways. The beauty of a group like this is that you could literally reach out to someone in a neighboring country or in a country across the world and say, how are you reaching rural communities? And they might say, we've been doing it for 10 years. We have lots of success. Have you considered this? And so by sharing our ideas and thinking about how do we reach the people we don't normally reach, hopefully you'll start thinking about the ways you can actually bring them to the table. And it has many benefits. For example, if you're a researcher, it's opening up those channels to hear about the communities you're working with. And that's an aspect of science communication where we say we want more dialogue, but often those people are not present at the table and we don't know how to bring them to the table. And so these are thinking of ways in which you can sit at a table, their table, rather than bring them to your table. And so it's just thinking in diverse ways ourselves, so we can be individually diverse and respond to different cultures. So fantastic. And I'll take one more. Does any other groups, can I have one more group that might want to share any of their ideas? Anything that was the same? Oh, fantastic. Nick, please do.
Okay, so hi everybody. I've decided that we are group 7. I can't really remember the number of the group, so I took the first empty one. I hope I didn't steal anybody's place.
No,
if I did,
fine.
please forgive me.
Yeah,
so the interesting thing is that in the excluded audience we were all from different countries and well, except 2 Italians, me and Katia, but we were from different institutions. And so one interesting thing is that there were some touch points in between our the audience that we cannot reach. Mainly related to income. So being there inside institution. So the whole institution is an institution with not that many funding, and they don't have much money to access, for example, publications or resources or these kind of things. But also people like lay people. And one interesting thing is that usually these people live very close, or they, I don't know, they sleep on the stairs of the museum, but they never go in the museum, not even if it is free. Or they are, I don't know, they live close to the library, but they never enter the place. So we decided to select this imaginary audience, addressing 2 main issues. One is that this audience doesn't speak the main very well the main language of the country, so is a non-native speaker. And the other one is that they have a low income. So the first thing is how to get in touch, because of course they don't come to us. One important thing is that we should segment the audience according to age, because this is a very, it can really make the difference. Because for example, to address young people, you can connect with the school, with the teachers. And so maybe this is a channel to reach them. Or you can, for example, try to do it online through social media, influencers. While if you have like an older audience, this is not gonna work. So maybe you should look more to community leaders or local people that can have an influence. Another important thing is that is to have someone that can speak both languages, so can act as a translator and as a cultural mediator. And then we were thinking where we can meet these people. So one idea was to go, of course, to their local places, but also maybe try to do something more informal. So for example, these people usually meet these communities in, I don't know, in parks, in some places in the city. So maybe doing an informal event in a park about science, even if they don't know about it, they may be curious and just come. And another thing that we thought about is that since they are underrepresented in general in life, it could be nice to do some event that actually celebrates their contribution, for example, of their scientists or their community to scientific progress. So instead of talking always about the same white Western scientists, maybe it can be done something about, I don't know, scientists from South America, from some specific place, from Africa, or from their place. So it could be interesting for them, and I think we think it can make them feel more also at home. So that's all. If I forgot something, please, someone from my group, just speak.
Those are all fantastic examples. And like the thing to definitely take from this is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of combinations of ways we can do that. You can take any one idea and choose 3 different places. And then you can look at the place and think, oh, let's reassess the way we do that. And the most important thing is that we try to reflect on what we do and always are ready to respond to the needs of our audiences. And when you said about the homeless people sitting outside the museum, but they would never go in, I thought that was wonderful. It immediately made me think that absolutely not everybody would even go in, and they might not feel they'd want to be in. And to be fair, there's many aspects of society that would not want to see a homeless person in a museum. And for various reasons in societies, it's not simple why they would not enter. But, excuse me, it doesn't mean that the museum can't try and reach out to them and even say, hey, we notice you're here all the time. We are going to open at this occasion for you to come in and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and we're going to put some food on for you. Come and eat some food. We have a room. Is there anything you'd like to know? It would require a lot of thinking, but that's the point. If we're passionate about reaching people and really making a difference in our societies, then we need to think of different ways to reach communities, and we have to go outside the box and be prepared to put in the extra work. It's not for them to put in the work, it's for us to put in the work. And that's the key point I want to leave here at. We need to put in the work to be more accessible for others. It's not down to them, it's always down to us. Okay, so there's some wonderful ideas, and that Padlet will remain open. You can go and view everyone else's ideas and thoughts. Again, we're setting up a group, a WhatsApp group, where you can share these ideas. I'll start putting more structure to that group, so we can start really working out how we can learn from each other, how we can interact. And so I'll be thinking about that after my project's done in 6 days. And so over March, April, on the long distance, we'll be really thinking about ways to bring our community together and think about solutions that can make differences slowly, but over the next coming months and years even. Okay, so to finish off this section before we go on a well-deserved break, I am gonna introduce a term and idea that I discussed earlier, that I said briefly earlier, and this is inclusive science communication. Now, this is a movement in science communication where some particular researchers are pushing the boundaries and saying, we don't want to just do science communication, we want to do inclusive science communication as an actual thing, where inclusion is an equity and intersectionality is embedded from the start of our thoughts, not as a byproduct and at the end. So they say inclusive science communication departs from traditional science communication practices by prioritizing inclusion, equity, and intersectionality as both central parts of the process and as desired outcomes. They focus on 3 main areas that they feel are important to consider when doing this type of work. First is intentionality. So you put it as part of your core intention. You consider your goals and you think about what you're trying to achieve. And within those goals, part of that is to achieve inclusion, equity, and intersectionality. Audiences are central to what we're trying to achieve here. So in that past exercise, we started with our audience. And so goals and audiences are the hallmark, the main pillars of science communication. Having goals and possibly SMART goals. If you're not aware about SMART goals, just type in SMART goals on any search engine and you'll get lots of information about what a SMART goal is. But you consider goals, you consider the specific audiences you want to target through those goals and with those goals, and the processes that you need to support diverse social identities. So you plan to be diverse, to support diverse people, and put it within your goals to specific audiences. So your intention has to be clear. Reciprocity is basically saying that it's not a one-way journey. It's not just you trying to benefit the people and you trying to provide stuff for the people. You want to learn from them as well and benefit yourself. And so you want to have this back and forward between the audience and the communicator. So you can co-create benefits for both of you. You both benefit, not just one. And you also have reflexivity. And that's the idea that you think systematically about what you do, about your own practices. You always critique and look back at what you've been doing to see, did it work? How did it work? Could I do this better? Is there anyone I'm not reaching? Am I just doing the same thing every time and not trying to diversify? Am I wondering why I'm not reaching communities, but not actually trying to change anything to do that? So you always have to be reflexive on your own practices, known as a reflexive practitioner, and thinking about your own practices and allowing space to adapt them as much as you can. So those are the three areas areas of inclusive science communication, and they have got an inclusive starter kit. So I'm going to share that with you to look through at your own freedom and your own time to learn more about what they do. And actually, now I'm looking here, I can't find it. So if anyone can feel free to type in Inclusive Science Communication Starter Kit. Hopefully you'll be able to find it, but if not, I will put it up there just in the next break. But they give 7 guidelines and things to think about, and they talk about it more in that starter kit. They say, what's your language? So what language are you using jargon? What language are you speaking in? Are you using big words that are beyond their vocabulary, or are you using words that they can engage with? Are you using words from the local community, terms that they're aware of, or are you unaware of the types of terms they use? All these things can help you to be more inclusive. Obviously, I would like to add that you should be authentic as well. So you shouldn't just try to use words they use just because you heard they use them. It's better when you really understand how they use it, and from the culture, it kind of rolls off your tongue normally. That helps, or working with someone who does. Engage with different ways of knowing and learning. So how do people like to learn? How do they like to find out? How do they like to access knowledge? Engage with these different methods, because that will allow you to have an increased overlap with your audience. Understand your organization's historical, cultural, and political context, and your audience's contexts. So it's not just in the here and now. Remember that they got to where they are now through a historical context, as did the place they're going in, as did the people who's talking to them, and their relationships with them. And so recognizing the history behind all of these situations, the politics surrounding it, can help you kind of tailor your message or be wary of not offending anyone in a way that excludes them. You want to kind of incorporate people, so be wary of the different situations that surround them, not just the person himself. Also, decenter yourself. Do not make it all about you and what you want to achieve. Make it all about them and what can benefit them and why they should indulge and involve themselves with what you're doing. Reflect on power dynamics. Are you a male that's white and of an age that people listen to? And are you speaking to a community that would look to you and think, oh, it's easy for them to talk because they've got all the benefits? Or are you from a community that is the opposite, or are you someone who's the opposite of the powerful traits and characteristics in society? So you might be a woman who generally is not regarded as much as men, or you might be from an ethnicity or religious group who are generally not regarded as much or as importantly as others. Because if you're talking to a group that is considered more powerful, then they might start having judgments and biases about you. So reflect on power dynamics, how you appear, how they appear to you. And this can help you kind of be more inclusive of the differences and be more equitable. Don't perpetuate exclusive or inequitable practices. So don't continue doing things that are excluding people. Think about what you're doing and why the people aren't in the room. Because if they're never in the room, maybe you are indulging in exclusive practices. And by adjusting, then more of those people will start entering the room. And it might take months, it might take years, but eventually there'll be a culture of actually, I see my people represented in that establishment or in that room, and therefore I'm more likely to go there and more likely to tell my fellow people of my community or group that this is a safe space and this is a place where we can go to, where we will be catered for. So we can increase that steadily and slowly by thinking inclusively. And then finally, view this work as a marathon, not a sprint, which I think is the best advice ever. We can't change the world in a day or in a week or in a month. We need to work on this for years and make it a part of what we do, make it something we breathe. Again, make it an intention that is at the focus of what we do, because then over time, we will learn more about the communities, the people we don't reach, and then we'll have time to learn more about those people, and then to tailor messages and approaches to suit them. So that was quite a lot of information, a lot to think about. Again, I will share the inclusive starter kit. I don't know if it's already been shared. I'll just have a look. Fantastic. Great. Thank you, Philippa. So yes, that is a link to the inclusive starter kit. Thank you, Sarah, as well. So you can just click on that link and you can learn more about that. But now it's time for a well-deserved break. So please do get away from your computer, relax, get a breather, relax your eyes. Because when we come back, we're going to be looking at justice and what justice is and how it relates to science communication. So I'll see you in just under 10 minutes. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. If you can hear my voice, that means we've just kicked back in. So I hope you've all managed to have a little break, get a drink, stretch your legs, your arms, and just get a little break from the screen. So now we're moving into our final part of the session, and in many ways, this is the most important part, and all of the parts are important, but this is kind of looking at it on a grander scale. What does our actions and what does what we do contribute to a wider perspective of things? Now, often the term JEDI is introduced, and we kind of know that, okay, somewhere vaguely, we're trying to achieve some type of justice, but often it's one person who has knowledge about that, or one or a few people who have knowledge about what that actually means. And the rest of us are just seeing these letters that are put together to make an interesting acronym. And we know that it's got something to do with being better or doing good and doing something that means more than what we're just doing on an everyday basis. So we have these vague feelings, and they're not always quantified or understood on a deeper level. And I myself had no idea of how are we achieving justice and what exactly is justice? What does that mean? And I hear social justice spoken about, but you know, you can't assume that everyone knows what that means. I don't know exactly what that means. And I have to think about it. What does it mean to achieve justice? As far as I knew, it was the police and the prisons. And so learning a bit more about it, finding out what exactly that could mean, can help us think about heading towards achieving these things and making them as intentions, or even being aware of the types of fights we're entering into. And I don't mean literal fights. I mean, I know there's a better word, but my mind can't think of it now. These type of challenges and things that we're willing to take on. So let's think about justice. So we can start with inequality, with unequal access to opportunities. And then we can think of trying to achieve equality, knowing and recognizing that that doesn't mean just giving people equal tools and assistance, which is a form of just behavior. It is justified in treating people in a similar way, so no one feels like they're being treated unfairly or different from others. But then we realize we need to go beyond that, because if you're in a position where you're not in a position of advantage, you will immediately know that that equal treatment is not really the fairest way this could have been divided. Classic example, if you've got someone who weighs twice as much as someone else, or is twice as big, for example, an adult and a child, who do you give more food to? It makes sense. The fairest thing to do is to give the adult slightly more food than the kid. Now, it does depend on the complexities of the situation, but as a crude example, we instinctively know this. So equity is the thing we want. And we looked at the tree and we saw that one needs a bigger ladder. Excellent. But many of you may have noticed the huge problem. The problem is the tree. It's not necessarily where the people are standing. If there was apples growing on both sides of the tree, it wouldn't matter where you were standing. It wouldn't matter where you was born, what situation you began in. You would all have even access. And then there would be slight reasons, differences that you might not specifically be able to get to it. Then you would give equitable solutions to match. But the problem is in the tree, and it's obvious in this picture. So what we're not just looking for is equity in how we provide solutions to people. We're actually looking for the system to be fixed so that people do not naturally fall into those situations in the first place. And then we wouldn't have to spend most of our efforts coming up with ways to get people to be balanced in an unbalanced system. The system would be balanced, and then most people wouldn't be in that position in the first place. And then we would start using our efforts and our personal diversity and ways of being more inclusive to think about the little differences between people based on their experiences or particular situations they might have been in life. So justice is about fixing the systems to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities, fixing the systems so that people do not feel or do not end up in these disadvantaged situations. Now, we are aware that we can't fix all the systems ourselves. We're aware that it takes many different angles and approaches, but at least thinking about that and how we can approach that through our work is a thing that I would like us to consider. So, justice. The American Bar Association, they kind of defend liberty and pursue justice in America. They say international standards recognize access to justice as both a basic human right and the means to protect other universally recognized human rights. We've already seen how it is a human right to have access to the advantages and benefits of science. And we can see also that by achieving justice or helping to achieve justice, we're also helping to fulfill people's basic human rights. So if we're acting in a way that is unjust and we don't realize that, then changing our practices would be the desirable solution. If we don't realize that our system is set up in a way that isn't just for everybody, acknowledging that and fighting to change that is something we can do. And as science communicators dealing with the sharing of knowledge predominantly, understanding that some systems may not allow people to have the same access to this knowledge. And so if we can help to fix those systems as science communicators by speaking to the policymakers, bringing evidence to the table, finding techniques to deal with different publics and different groups, and using our skills as science communicators to help really make slight differences, then it's a good thing. But it does require a lot more input, a lot of investigation. We're generally not thinking in these ways often. And so it's now time to open up that conversation. So what is justice? Well, justice, according to the United Nations, is an ideal of accountability and fairness in the protection and vindication of rights and the prevention and punishment of wrongs. Now, this is a general idea of justice, and it's interesting that it says it's an ideal. So when we think of justice, it's not a hard, fast thing. It's not that is justice and it's done. It's that there's something we're trying to head towards, and it's kind of an idea that's mostly formulated to get us into this ideal state, a place where we would ideally like to be. But it's not a simple and straightforward notion. For example, justice is not absolute, fixed, and unyielding, but rather a concept that is somewhat fluid and that grows organically as societies grow richer in access to resources and start to recognize rights that were marginal as actual basic rights. So a classic example is the right to vote. In some cultures now, in some countries now, most of the society has the right to vote. But we know historically in those same cultures, some people weren't allowed to vote, like people of color and women. People had to fight for those rights, and they were seen as marginal. They were pushed out to the margin. But through time, effort, and recognition, we realized that they should be basic, simple rights. And as cultures progress and become more aware of each other, people start incorporating different rights into their everyday discourse. So how can we seek justice? Well, there are 4 main types of justice that we could try to seek. One is distributive justice. So it's about how things and resources are distributed. So how things should be shared fairly, including the benefits and the burdens. So is knowledge shared fairly around the world? Is access to knowledge shared fairly? Is access to COVID vaccines shared fairly around the world? These are parts of the advantages of science. So it's a human right for everyone to have access to it. Now, obviously, it's not a simple case of just saying, sure, let's take it and give it to everybody. There are more complicated things behind it, but acknowledging from the very start that not having fair and even access to these things is an injustice. Okay, so distributive justice. Then we have procedural justice. So are judgments and decision-making processes fair? So was the judgment made in a fair way? Did they listen to all of the people who were involved? Or did they just listen to one side of the story and make a decision? Was the jury that was making this decision about a person all from one community, from the community of the person that was on trial? Or were they all from the community from the person who was considered the victim? Was it fair? Was the procedure fair? Then you have retributive justice. So that's proportional and fair punishment for wrongdoing, also known as an eye for an eye. And then we have restorative justice, where contact between the wrongdoer and the victim is made to seek the justice that feels right for the victim. So it's not done separately. Both the wrongdoer and the wrong done meet, normally with a mediator, to discuss the situation and understand each other's point of view, to restore faith and the relationships between these people and their societies that they live in. Okay, now out of the 4, I'm pretty sure many of you may have realized and seen that retributive seems a bit harsh, and it doesn't seem what we're trying to achieve in science communication. And that's correct. I would argue the same thing. I don't think in science communication we do this to punish people. I don't think there's any aspect of what we do where we're trying to seek punishment of people through science communication and our practices. So we can get that one out of the way and not think about it. But that leaves us with these other 3 areas. Now, an example of distributive justice in science communication would be, does everyone have equal opportunities to access science? And can we use science communication to try and balance that? Can we use what we know to try and provide more access and equal access to science? And I think you'll find the answer is, well, yes. We looked in the last exercise at how we can diversify our practices as science communicators to try and provide better access to science to communities who currently are not accessing it. So yes, we can try and balance injustices through distributive justice. Does everybody have an equitable share of representation in science communication? So when we look into communities, do we have people who are actually communicating the science from different communities? Is it hard to access the field of science communication? Is it just people who are wealthy or middle class or educated? Why aren't there more people who can indulge in science communication? And we need to look at our own field and think about, are we actually equitable within our field? And are there certain situations or things that are stopping people from being able to join in with the thing that we do? And so that would be finding equity and being distributive, achieving distributive justice. So these are some ways we can touch upon it. And it's always more complicated than just saying it, but it's just thinking that, oh, maybe I can be achieving this type of justice through these behaviors and actions. Procedural justices. So how can we think about that with science communication? And obviously all of these things, a lot of these are things that I've had to look into briefly. I'm not a lawyer. This is not my speciality. I had to learn as much as I could to try and think about how we could target these things in our practices, to try and get grips on it. So if you think anything different from any of these ideas, please do let me know. We're in this together. If you feel that any of these don't apply or should be applied differently, let's open the conversation and learn more about it together. But for a moment, I've seen it as public's participation in decision-making. So when people make decisions, are they based on evidence-based practices or are they not? Can we help them to make decisions based on evidence? And so when people are deciding that they don't want to take a vaccine because one person they met said that, gave reasons of why it isn't good, is that fair? Are they making that decision based on the balanced level of knowledge? Have they had access, provision to that knowledge? Are we helping them to make evidence-based decisions by taking efforts to provide the evidence to them in a way that they understand? What can we do to influence that, to help them make fair decisions on what they want to do? And a classic argument that I've seen in the news was if you don't take the vaccine, then you are endangering the lives of people around you. Now, you can argue whether that's fair or not. You can argue whether it's fair to say if you haven't taken a vaccine, you cannot go on holiday, but helping people to understand why these judgments are made, the procedures behind it, can be helping to contribute towards some form of procedural justice. Also, things we can do is to communicate how science works. If people don't feel that scientists are making decisions in a fair way and they're not following fair processes and that they haven't included them or consulted them in the decisions they've made to roll out jabs, for example, then they are less likely to trust science and scientists, which has an effect down the line. So things like communicating how science works, to let people know how scientists do their decisions, also be including people in those decision-making through things like citizen science, can help people to start feeling whether they think the procedures are justified and to see whether we are being justified in what we're doing. Because it may be that someone is doing an unjust and unjust action and practice, and we needed someone to point it out to us that, yeah, you're doing it that way, but actually, do you realize the injustice in that? So communicate how science works, for example, how uncertainty works, and also the concept of scientific consensus. What does that mean? How do scientists arrive at that? Why do they make their decisions and come up to their conclusions? So procedural justice. Finally, restorative justice. So this is an interesting one. This is where you get the two sides to meet and to discuss and talk about the situation. And we know that in science communication, this is a technique we're hearing about more and more, where you don't just talk to people, talk at them and fill their gaps in knowledge and experience and think you can fill a deficit and they'll trust and believe in science and feel happy. No, it doesn't work like that. We need to indulge in dialogue, bring people to the table, join them at their table, and open discussions and communications. So a classic example is in Hawaii, where telescopes have been built on sacred land. And there are many different examples of where science has been done in sacred land. For example, archaeologists wanting to dig and explore for a tomb. Well, you're doing it in a sacred land, and we'd rather you'd respect our lands when you do that, or consult with us. If you share with us what you're trying to achieve, maybe we can find a way of dealing with that. And often the restorative means it's already been done. So often we're trying to catch up with things that have been done in the history of science. And so we need to consult with those communities to see what they feel would be the best option to restore justice. Because it might not be to just get off of our lands, destroy your telescopes and leave, because that isn't fair for the people who's made the mistake as well. We want to achieve as much fairness as possible. So we need to open up the conversation so both parties can see where they're coming from and try to find some type of harmony or consensus afterwards. Another example is where museums consult communities to return or reinterpret cultural heritage, where they have dug up things from the land, put it in their museum as an example of A, B, or C, but I've not really included the communities in this action, where every time these communities visit this museum, this science museum, they're outright offended by what they see. And so we need to consult and try to restore these feelings of justice. Now, I've introduced all of those ideas. Now we're going to do a brief exercise, and it's just to get you thinking. I don't know how much we can do with this, but it's an exercise that I'd like your feedback on. Now, science communication for justice. There's no comprehensive theory of justice that's available to us. We just have to make do with partial theories. Theories about what justice requires in particular domains of human life. For example, you hear about social justice, but how many of you have heard of these other types of justice? There's epistemic injustice, where people's rights as a knower, as a person who knows things about their world, is not valued. And so we value the scientific knowledge more than their particular knowledge. That's an injustice that can be rectified. There's climate justice. For example, are we being fair to the people around the world based on issues of climate change and the way we act? So are we polluting our environment and producing all the pollution? And then people who are suffering most are not producing all the pollution. That's a climate injustice that we can work to solve and bring attention to. Global justice, that's the idea that justice isn't just within your nation now, that there's international forms of justice that work beyond your borders. And so something that applies here needs to also apply there, because we're dealing with situations that are more global in nature. And so we recognize global injustices. And environmental justice. A classic example is where this movement began. It was in the US, where people were noticing that there were 14 waste places where waste was being dumped, the spoils of society. And they realized that 12 or 11 out of these 14 places where the stuff was being dumped were poor or ethnic communities. And they just said, why is it that all this waste isn't around like balanced? Why aren't we sharing in the burdens equally? Why do we have to front all the burdens for all of society? And that's one example of environmental justice. Now, right now, I'm thrilled by the idea of restorative justice. It is a really cool one. And so what I want to do is, for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, probably 10 minutes, I'm going to give you links to videos. And before, what I was going to do is, I would have got you into breakout rooms. I would have showed you, given you one of these videos each in each breakout room. And then I was going to get you to watch it individually and then have a little discussion about it and think about how could we restore, how can we use restorative justice there? How can we use science communication to create some type of restorative justice. So would it be you'd be getting people around a table to discuss the issues? Would you realize who's being wrong done by it and say, right, we're going to bring those groups together, bring their evidence in and focus that as our communication to achieve that type of justice? Would it be that you realize that some people have not got access to some type of knowledge or the resources aren't distributed, and so you want to target distributive justice regarding the climate or the global justice or environmental justice, and you want to bring that together and make that a thing that you're going to try and achieve within that particular, make that a source of intention for that particular goal? Or is it that you want to look at procedural justice? Do you want to help people realize why a certain procedure was followed or why it was unjust and it should have been followed in a different way? And remember, this isn't just the public. These are politicians you might want to target. It might be school teachers. It might be just members of a particular religious group, a particular characteristics group. So I want you to just think about what you know about science communication and how you might be able to achieve justice through that. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to put you into breakout rooms. I'm going to leave this totally free. I'm going to drop you 4 links to videos. These are examples that I found. And I'd like you now, just for another 5 minutes, to choose any one of those types of justice you want. And in that video, they'll talk to you, they'll tell you about that type of justice or injustice. So choose the one you want to learn more about. You can check them all out in your own time. Just watch the video. Some of them are only 2 minutes long. Some of them are 8 minutes long. You only have to watch to 5 minutes. So the one that's 8 minutes long, I think it's climate justice, maybe global justice. You only have to look till about, listen till 5 minutes. But if you want to check more, please do. So please do go away in your own time now. I'm going to stop talking. Just watch, choose one type of justice and think about how you might achieve that using science communication. Some of them might seem more vague. For example, the global justice one, that's the only video that I could find about that topic that was short enough for this session. And so please do, if you can think of a better example, let me know. But it's just there to give you an indication of some stuff that's happening. So choose anyone you want, it's in the chat. Watch it through at your own time. And then please do just come back to the main room whenever you're ready and just open up a discussion with me about any of them. And let's just have a chat for this last part to think about justice. I am going to share another image on the screen to give you some things to think about. But off you go. I'm going to stop talking. Otherwise, you won't be able to listen to the videos. But I'm going to be here ready for any conversations or discussions around it. Okay, good luck. Well, descriptions of each type of justice are also now on the screen if you getting stuck with what each one was. And hello, I'm just going to bring everyone's back so we can just finish off the session in the last 2 minutes. And as always, I will hang around for another 10 minutes after the end or the official end of the session in case you want to share any ideas or thoughts. But I hope you managed to look at one of those areas and just get an idea of the types of things that it has. So I would say that there are different types of justice we could try and achieve. And for example, epistemic justice is relevant to doctor's surgeries where medical science is deemed more important than the people's own lived experiences, whereas their experiences can provide insight into how to deal with their issue in some occasions. And so we need to value that knowledge. And on the global level, things like only 16% of people in low-income countries receiving a single vaccine dose compared to 80% in high-income countries. Being able to describe why that is and find ways to circumvent that or overcome that would be a big goal that we could try and head towards. But the problems are really complicated and they're not easy. Other things, for example, in reporting, if you're used to journalism or are a journalist, you need to realize that in international reporting, you need nuance and in policy discussions. You couldn't just shout out vaccine hesitancy, but you have to really look at many of the different structural barriers that are intersecting to create those problems. So I'm very looking forward to see if you have any ideas. Please feel free to just add them to the Padlet. I've put a link there. If you have anything you want to say or comment about any of those, but it is mainly something for you to reflect on, to think about how justice can apply potentially to science communication. So I hope this session has given you lots to think about. I hope there are many different avenues now that you may be willing to explore within your work, but the conversation only just starts here. So I will be supplying a WhatsApp group. If you haven't joined it already, feel free to. If you want a link, let me know and I can put it in the chat. But I will be sending out emails with all this information soon. So thank you for joining. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Whatever you're doing, please do enjoy the day and make the most of it, whether it's the morning, the evening, the afternoon, or the night. So it's been my great pleasure to have you guys with me for the past few hours.